My name is Jack, and if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here, questioning everything about my marriage, I wouldn't have believed them. Kayla and I have been married for 10 years, and while we've had our ups and downs, I thought we were solid. We built a life together, careers, a home, even dreams of starting a family one day. But now I'm not so sure. It started with Mary, one of Kayla's closest friends. Mary is, well, she's a force of nature. Confident, outspoken, and always ready with an opinion, whether you ask for it or not. Kayla had been spending more and more time with her lately, going to brunches, late-night chats, and weekend getaways. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone needs friends outside their marriage, but looking back, I realized that Mary's influence was like a slow, creeping fog, quietly changing the dynamic between Kayla and me. One night, Kayla came home from one of her meetups with Mary, practically glowing with excitement. She was more animated than I'd seen her in weeks, talking a mile a minute about new perspectives and redefining traditional relationships. I was half listening at first, nodding along as I worked on a project at my desk. But then something she said caught my attention. Mary says the idea of marriage is too restrictive for modern women, she said, leaning against the doorway with a glass of wine in hand. She calls it female marriage. You know, a partnership where women can truly be free while still maintaining a home life. I set down my pen and turned to look at her, unsure if she was joking or serious. And what does that mean exactly? It's about balance, she said, her eyes lighting up. It's about women being able to explore themselves, to grow, to not feel tied down by outdated expectations. Mary thinks it's the key to happiness, not just for women but for men too. A way to bring more honesty and openness into relationships. Her words didn't sit right with me, but I didn't want to overreact. So what, like an open marriage? I asked, half laughing, hoping that wasn't what she was implying. Kayla hesitated for just a moment before shrugging. Not exactly, but maybe something like that. Mary says it can bring couples closer, help them understand each other better. I forced a smile, trying to keep my tone light. I think Mary might be oversimplifying things a bit. Marriage is already about understanding and compromise, isn't it? Kayla waved me off with a laugh. Of course, but there's nothing wrong with exploring new ideas, right? It's not like I'm saying we need to do anything drastic. It's just interesting. The conversation ended there, but it stuck with me. Kayla had never brought up anything like this before. We'd always been on the same page about what we wanted from our marriage, or so I thought. But now, for the first time, I felt like there was a wedge being driven between us, one that I couldn't quite see but could definitely feel. Over the next few weeks, Kayla continued talking about Mary's ideas, weaving them into casual conversations like they were normal. She brought up articles about alternative relationships, pointed out examples of celebrities who had embraced freedom in their marriages, and even suggested that we read a book together about rethinking traditional partnerships. Every time she mentioned it, I felt a pang of unease, but I told myself it was just a phase, something she was curious about but wouldn't actually pursue. I was wrong. One evening, after dinner, Kayla sat me down on the couch, her face serious but calm. "Jack," she began, taking my hands in hers. "I've been thinking a lot about us lately, about how much I love you and how much I want our marriage to thrive. And I think I've figured out a way to make that happen." My stomach tightened. I already knew where this was going, but I let her continue. "I want us to have the kind of marriage where we can be completely honest with each other, where we can explore who we are without fear of judgment or resentment. I think we should try opening things up." Her words hung in the air like a thundercloud. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "You want an open marriage?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. "I want a marriage where we can grow," she replied, her tone earnest. "Mary says it's transformed her relationship. She and her partner are happier than ever because they're not holding each other back. They've learned to trust each other on a deeper level." "Kayla," I said slowly, pulling my hands away, "we've been together for 10 years. We've built a life together based on love, commitment, and trust. And now you're telling me that you want to throw all of that away because Mary thinks it's a good idea. It's not throwing it away, she insisted. It's enhancing it, making it stronger. I shook my head, anger and disbelief bubbling under the surface. Stronger for who? Because it sure doesn't sound like you're thinking about us. It sounds like you're thinking about you. Kayla looked taken aback, but she didn't back down. I'm thinking about both of us, Jack. I'm thinking about what could make us happier, freer. Don't you want that too? I didn't answer. Couldn't. The woman sitting in front of me, pitching this idea like it was some kind of enlightened solution, didn't feel like the Kayla I had married. And for the first time in our relationship, I realized that maybe I didn't know her as well as I thought. The next few days were tense after Kayla's initial suggestion of an open marriage. I could feel the weight of her unspoken thoughts every time we were in the same room. She wasn't ready to let it go, and deep down, I knew another conversation was inevitable. I just didn't expect it to come over something as ordinary as dinner. It was a Friday night, and Kayla had insisted on cooking. She prepared one of my favorites, grilled salmon with roasted vegetables and a bottle of wine to go with it. I knew this wasn't just a casual meal. The effort she put into the evening told me she had something big on her mind. As we sat down, she was unusually quiet, her eyes flickering toward me as though gauging my mood. I let the silence linger, focusing on my plate, waiting for her to make the first move. Sure enough, halfway through the meal, she set her fork down and cleared her throat. "Jack," she began softly, "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about the other night. Here we go," I thought, keeping my face neutral as I met her gaze. "I don't want you to think I'm unhappy or that I don't love you," she continued. "Because I do. You're my best friend, my partner, my everything. But I think there's something missing for me, something I need to explore, just for a little while." I raised an eyebrow, staying quiet as she took a sip of wine, clearly trying to steady her nerves. "I've been talking to Mary about this," she went on, "and she thinks it could be good for me and for us if I had the chance to, well, date other people, just for a few months. Nothing serious, nothing that would jeopardize our marriage. It would be temporary, Jack. A way for me to figure out some things about myself." Her words were calm, measured, as though she had rehearsed them 100 times. But all I could hear was the casual suggestion that I should be okay with my wife stepping out of our marriage. "Date other people?" I repeated, my voice steady but firm. "You want to temporarily date other men while we're married? It's not about replacing you," she said quickly. "It's about growth, about seeing what's out there and understanding myself better. I don't want to do this behind your back, Jack. I want it to be open and honest, something we both agree on." I put my fork down and leaned back in my chair, taking a moment to let her words sink in. "And you think this won't affect our marriage?" I asked, my tone sharper now. "That you can just explore other people and come back like nothing happened? It doesn't have to change anything," she insisted. "Mary said her relationship only got stronger because of it. They're more honest with each other now than ever before." "Mary?" I said, my voice laced with irritation. "This is Mary's idea, isn't it? She's the one convincing you this is normal, that it's healthy." Kayla flinched but didn't deny it. "It's not just Mary. I've read about it too. There are so many couples who've done this and come out stronger on the other side. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's worth considering." I stared at her, a mixture of disbelief and frustration bubbling inside me. "Kayla, I don't support this. I can't. You're asking me to be okay with something that goes against everything we built this marriage on. Trust, commitment, exclusivity. If you feel like something's missing, we should be working on that together, not bringing other people into the equation." She looked down at her plate, her expression conflicted. "I understand where you're coming from, but I don't think you're seeing the bigger picture. This isn't about us being broken. It's about me wanting to grow, to explore who I am outside of just being your wife." Her words stung more than I cared to admit. "And what about me, Kayla? Do I get to explore too? Or is this just something you want for yourself?" She hesitated, and that pause told me everything I needed to know. "I'm not saying you can't if that's what you want," she said finally, though her tone lacked conviction. "But this isn't about rules or fairness. It's about what feels right for us individually. I shook my head, pushing my chair back and standing up. I don't think we see eye to eye on what's right, Kayla. I've given you 10 years of loyalty and commitment, and now you're telling me that's not enough. I can't stop you from doing what you want, but don't expect me to sit here and be okay with it. Jack, please, she said, standing up as well. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to be honest. Well, here's my honesty, I said, meeting her eyes. I love you, Kayla, but I won't be part of something that compromises what we have. If you go down this road, I don't think there's any coming back. Her face fell, and for a moment, she looked genuinely hurt. But she didn't argue. Instead, she nodded slowly and sat back down, her expression unreadable. The rest of the evening passed in silence, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. Our marriage had reached a crossroads, and Kayla was the one holding the map. The evening after our tense conversation was eerily quiet. Kayla and I barely spoke, each retreating into our own thoughts. She must have assumed I was cooling down, processing her proposal to temporarily date other men. I had told her I'd move into the guest room for some space, and she seemed relieved, taking it as a sign that I was willing to compromise or, at the very least, consider her request. But she couldn't have been more wrong. That night, I lay in the small bed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Her words echoed over and over. It's not about us being broken. It's about me wanting to grow. It wasn't just the betrayal of the idea itself. It was the lack of respect for what we had built together. She wanted me to stand by while she explored other relationships, as if my feelings, my commitment, and our 10 years of marriage meant nothing. By morning, I had made my decision. I couldn't stay here, not like this. If Kayla wanted the freedom to grow, then she could have it without me. While she was still asleep, I quietly gathered my essentials. Clothes, my laptop, toiletries, and a few sentimental items I couldn't leave behind. I moved swiftly, not wanting to risk a confrontation. As I packed, I felt a strange mix of anger, sadness, and an odd sense of relief. This wasn't the life I signed up for, and I wasn't going to sit around waiting for her to dismantle our marriage piece by piece. I left her a brief note on the kitchen counter. Kayla, you made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Don't try to contact me, Jack. I grabbed my keys, loaded my things into the car, and drove away without looking back. Later that morning, I imagined Kayla waking up, expecting to find me sulking in the guest room. Instead, she would find the note and the empty space where I used to be. I wondered how long it would take her to realize I was serious, that I wasn't just giving her the space she wanted. I was leaving for good. From what I heard later, her initial reaction was shock. She hadn't thought I would actually leave. In her mind, my move to the guest room was a concession, a sign that I was willing to compromise. She didn't realize that it was my way of preparing to walk away entirely. She tried calling me, of course, over and over, but I had already blocked her number before I even left the driveway. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her justifications, or her attempts to convince me that this was all for the greater good of our marriage. When she couldn't reach me, she turned to our mutual friends, asking if they had seen or heard from me, but I had been deliberate in who I confided in. The few friends I trusted knew the situation and respected my decision to cut ties, refusing to share any details with her. They told me about her frantic texts and calls, her desperate attempts to find out where I had gone. She's panicking, Jack. One of them told me over the phone. I think she's starting to realize how badly she screwed up. Good, I thought. She needed to feel the consequences of her choices. For the next few weeks, I stayed off the grid, staying with a friend out of town while I figured out my next steps. I avoided social media, changed my email address, and kept my location private. Kayla had no way of reaching me, and that was exactly how I wanted it. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I deserved better. Kayla had shown me that she valued her own desires more than the sanctity of our marriage, and I wasn't going to stick around to watch her tear it apart. If she wanted freedom, she could have it, but she'd have to face that freedom without me. After I left, Kayla's world started unraveling faster than even I could have anticipated. At first, I heard nothing directly, just snippets from mutual friends who reluctantly passed on what they knew. Kayla had taken my departure as an act of defiance, not a final goodbye. Her initial shock quickly turned to anger, and in her mind, it was all my fault. I could almost hear her justifying it. Jack was too rigid, too controlling. He didn't understand my needs. But instead of reevaluating her choices, she dove headfirst into her newfound freedom. According to what I later learned, she began spending more time at the office, but not to work harder. Her colleagues Larry and Josh, who had always seemed a little too friendly with her at company events, became central figures in her life. It didn't take long for their friendships to turn into something more. She started using the office itself as a rendezvous point for her escapades, sneaking off during lunch breaks or staying late after hours. Larry, the company's IT manager, and Josh, a senior sales executive, were both married with families of their own. That didn't seem to bother Kayla or them. Mary, of course, was fully supportive, egging her on and calling it empowerment. What Kayla didn't realize was that her actions weren't as discreet as she thought. Office rumors began swirling, whispers of closed-door meetings and suspiciously long breaks. At first, no one said anything outright. After all, it was none of their business. But as the behavior escalated, it started drawing attention from the higher-ups. It wasn't just Kayla, Larry, and Josh who were under scrutiny. Mary, who worked in HR, was accused of enabling the misconduct, turning a blind eye to policies meant to prevent workplace relationships from spiraling into unprofessional territory. When complaints began piling up, the company's leadership had no choice but to launch an internal investigation. The investigation was swift and thorough. Emails, security footage, and witness statements painted a damning picture of what had been happening behind closed doors. Kayla's clandestine meetings with Larry and Josh were no longer secret, and neither were the inappropriate uses of office resources. Mary's involvement only made matters worse, as it became clear she had actively covered up for them. When the notices of dismissal were issued, it was the scandal of the year. Kayla, Larry, Josh, and Mary were all terminated for gross misconduct and violations of the company's code of conduct. The fallout was catastrophic for all of them. Larry's wife filed for divorce almost immediately, taking their 2 kids with her. Josh's wife, on the other hand, decided to stay for now, but the strain on their marriage was evident. Mary, who had always been the loudest voice in favor of Kayla's lifestyle, found herself ostracized from her professional network, her reputation irreparably damaged. As for Kayla, she was left jobless, friendless, and increasingly isolated. Without the stability of her career, she began to realize just how much she had lost. Mutual friends told me she tried to reach out to some of them for support, but most of them had already taken my side. They saw her behavior for what it was: selfish, reckless, and destructive. Hearing about Kayla's downfall didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it might. If anything, it just reinforced how much she had changed, or maybe how much she had always been this way, and I had just refused to see it. Her choices had consequences, and now she was living with them. I had no intention of stepping in to help her. She had made it clear that I wasn't part of the life she wanted to build, and I had no desire to clean up the mess she'd made. Kayla had chosen her path, and now she was walking it alone. When I left Kayla and our marriage behind, I told myself I was done with her, that I would move on and build a life free of her betrayal. But as the weeks passed and I heard bits and pieces of what she had been up to, her reckless behavior, her affairs at work, and her complete disregard for the fallout, I realized there was one thing left I needed to do. It wasn't about petty revenge or getting even. It was about making sure the lies and selfishness that had destroyed my marriage wouldn't continue to hurt others, including the people Kayla had dragged into her mess. She had taken something sacred and turned it into a circus, and I wasn't going to let her walk away without facing the consequences. I started by gathering everything I could to strengthen my position in the divorce. Through the limited channels I still had access to, I collected evidence of Kayla's affairs with her colleagues, Larry and Josh. Some of it came from mutual friends who worked at the company and were all too happy to expose the scandal. Others were anonymous tips, likely from people who had grown tired of Kayla's antics at work. Emails, text messages, and even security footage from her office painted a damning picture. The evidence was overwhelming, showing not only her infidelity but also her blatant disregard for workplace policies and professional boundaries. With this arsenal of information, I sat down with my attorney, Linda, who was more than eager to put the pieces together. "This isn't just about the divorce," she said, scanning the documents I had handed over. "This is about setting the record straight, for you and for everyone else she's affected." When the divorce proceedings began, Kayla showed up with an air of defiance, as though she still believed she could spin the narrative in her favor. That confidence crumbled quickly when Linda presented the evidence. The judge's expression hardened as each piece of evidence was laid out. Emails arranging late-night rendezvous in the office, surveillance footage of her, and Larry sneaking into restricted areas, and testimonies from witnesses who had seen her behavior firsthand. Kayla tried to deny it at first, then shifted to justifications. "I was exploring myself," she exclaimed at one point, echoing the same tired rhetoric Mary had fed her. But the judge wasn't interested in excuses. By the end of the hearing, it was clear that Kayla had not only destroyed our marriage but also violated professional and ethical boundaries in ways that couldn't be ignored. The ruling was swift and decisive. I was granted the majority of our shared assets, including the house, and Kayla was ordered to pay a portion of the legal fees. But more importantly, the evidence from the trial had far-reaching consequences for the others involved. Larry and Josh, the men who had been complicit in Kayla's betrayal, faced their own reckonings. Their wives, who had been kept in the dark about the scandal until the court proceedings, filed for divorce almost immediately. Both men lost their families and their reputations. Larry's wife took their kids and moved out of state, cutting all ties, while Josh's wife made it clear that their marriage was over for good. The fallout extended beyond the personal. Kayla's employer, embarrassed by the scandal and the lawsuit that followed, found themselves in the crosshairs. Linda filed a separate claim against the company, arguing that their lax enforcement of workplace policies had allowed the misconduct to escalate unchecked. The company initially tried to fight back, but the mountain of evidence made their position untenable. In the end, they settled, agreeing to pay damages and implement strict new rules of conduct to prevent similar incidents in the future. Mandatory training sessions, oversight committees, and a zero-tolerance policy for workplace relationships were put in place. The scandal became a cautionary tale within the industry, a warning of what happens when boundaries are ignored. For Kayla, the consequences were devastating. She lost her job, her reputation, and any hope of repairing the relationships she had destroyed. The financial strain from the legal fees and the settlement left her struggling to stay afloat, and her social circle, once propped up by Mary and her toxic influence, evaporated overnight. For me, the victory wasn't about punishment, it was about closure. Kayla had made choices that destroyed our marriage and hurt countless others, and now she was finally facing the full weight of those decisions. I walked away from the experience with my head held high, knowing that I had done everything I could to protect myself and ensure that justice was served. As for my future, I was ready to leave it all behind and start fresh. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. I had taken back control of my life, and that was the greatest revenge of all. A few months after the dust had settled, after the court battles, the scandals, and the damage Kayla had done to her life, I received an unexpected letter. It arrived in a plain envelope with no return address, the handwriting unmistakably hers. I stared at it for a while before opening it, unsure if I even wanted to know what she had to say. Inside was a carefully written letter, the tone markedly different from the Kayla I had confronted months earlier. Gone was the defiance, the self-righteous justification for her actions. Instead, it was an outpouring of remorse, filled with admissions of guilt and a plea for reconciliation. "Jack," the letter began, "I don't even know if you'll read this, but I hope you do. I've had a lot of time to think about everything that's happened, and I realize now how much I've hurt you, myself, and everyone around me. I was selfish, reckless, and completely blind to what I was throwing away." She went on to detail the fallout from her decisions, The loss of her job, the breakdown of her friendships, the isolation she now faced. "You were right," she admitted. "I let people like Mary influence me, and I convinced myself that what I was doing was empowering when all it did was destroy everything I cared about." The letter ended with a plea. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. If you'll give me another chance, I'll live by whatever conditions you set. I just want to come home." Reading her words stirred something in me I hadn't expected. For months, I had built a life around moving forward, around letting go of the anger and betrayal. But now, here she was, asking for forgiveness, admitting she had been wrong, and offering to start over under my terms. Part of me wanted to ignore the letter, to throw it away and continue with the life I had begun to rebuild. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I had loved for a decade, wondered if reconciliation was possible. After days of deliberation, I decided to meet with her. Not to make promises or decisions, but to hear her out in person. We met at a neutral location, a small cafe where we could talk without the weight of the past hanging over us. Kayla looked different. The confidence she once carried had been replaced by a quiet humility. She apologized again, this time face to face, her voice trembling as she acknowledged the pain she had caused. "I know I can't erase what I've done," she said, "but I want to try to make amends." I listened, letting her say everything she needed to say. When she was finished, I leaned back in my chair, choosing my words carefully. "If I agree to give you another chance," I said, "there are going to be rules, strict ones. This is not going to be the same marriage we had before, and you're going to have to earn my trust back one day at a time." She nodded, her expression serious. "I'll do whatever it takes." We drafted a new framework for our relationship, one that left no room for ambiguity or deceit. The rules were clear and non-negotiable.
Ponto complete transparência nos secrets, no hidden phones, no unexplained absences.
2. Regular counseling sessions to address the issues that had led us here. 3. A renewed focus on building trust, which included cutting ties with anyone from her past who had encouraged her destructive behavior. Kayla agreed to everything without hesitation, and over the next few weeks, we began the slow, difficult process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, times when the memories of her betrayal felt like too much to bear. But she was consistent in her efforts, showing me every day that she was committed to changing. I'm not sure what the future holds, but for now, I've decided to give us a chance. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about finding a way to move forward. Kayla has a long road ahead of her, and so do I. But for the first time in months, it feels like we're walking it together. The months following Kayla's return were a delicate balancing act. Trust is not something that can be rebuilt overnight, especially after it's been shattered so thoroughly. But to her credit, Kayla threw herself into the new rules we had agreed upon, working tirelessly to prove that she was committed to earning back my trust and rebuilding our marriage. One of the first things she did was leave behind the professional world that had been at the center of so much turmoil. It was her decision, and one she insisted on making. "I want to focus on us," she told me, "on our home, our future, and the life we're trying to rebuild together." It was a big adjustment for her, but she embraced her new role wholeheartedly. She took charge of the household, managing everything from meals to cleaning to ensuring our home felt like a place of peace rather than the battleground it had become. At first, I worried it might be too much of a change for her, but Kayla approached it with a quiet determination that surprised me. Not long after her return, we received some unexpected news. Kayla was pregnant. The timing was overwhelming, but the joy it brought with it was undeniable. When we found out we were expecting twins, it felt like a new chapter was being written. A chance to start fresh, not just for us but for the family we were about to grow. The pregnancy brought challenges, of course. Kayla had moments where her emotions got the better of her, and there were times when I struggled to balance my lingering doubts with the excitement of becoming a father. But through it all, Kayla remained steadfast, doing everything she could to show me that she was fully committed to this new life we were building together. When the twins, a boy and a girl, were born, it was as if a weight lifted from both of us. Holding them in my arms, I felt something shift. An overwhelming sense of responsibility, yes, but also a flicker of the love and connection I had once felt with Kayla. Life after the twins arrived was hectic but fulfilling. Kayla poured herself into motherhood, devoting her days to caring for the babies and maintaining the home. She never complained, never pushed back against the structure we had put in place. It wasn't just about following the rules. It was about showing me, day after day, that she was willing to do whatever it took to make our marriage work. There were still challenges. Trust isn't something that can be forced, and there were times when I found myself questioning whether I could ever fully let go of the past. But Kayla's consistency, her patience, and her unwavering effort to rebuild what she had broken began to chip away at the walls I had built around myself. For Kayla, the shift in her life wasn't easy, but she found happiness in the simplicity of it. "I've learned what really matters," she told me one night as we sat on the couch, watching the twins sleep on the baby monitor. "It's not about freedom or exploring myself. It's about us, about being the wife and mother I want to be." Her words felt genuine, and for the first time in a long time I found myself believing her. Our life now isn't perfect. It's not the fairy tale we once imagined when we first got married, but it's real, and it's built on a foundation that, while cracked and scarred, is stronger than it's ever been. Kayla continues to honor the commitments we made, and I continue to work on letting go of the pain and doubt that still linger. Despite everything, we've found a way forward. Kayla's happiness now comes from the life we've created together, and while there are moments when the past creeps in, we've learned to face it together. For better or worse, we've chosen to stay and fight for what we have. And for now, that's enough. The fallout from Kayla's actions didn't just end with us. It rippled outward, leaving the other players in her tangled web to face their own consequences. While Kayla worked to rebuild our marriage and her life within the framework we had set, the others were left to reckon with the chaos they had created. Mary, the instigator of so much destruction, suffered the harshest consequences. After her dismissal from her HR position and the exposure of her involvement in multiple workplace scandals, her professional reputation was ruined. But the real blow came from her personal life. Her husband, who had initially stood by her during the early years of their marriage, discovered the full extent of her deceit when the investigation revealed her role in covering for Kayla, Larry, and Josh. He wasted no time filing for divorce. Unlike me, he wasn't interested in reconciliation or second chances. Their joint assets were liquidated, with him taking his share and leaving Mary with the debts they had accumulated during their marriage. She lost their house, her social circle, and her stability. By the end of it all, Mary was left scrambling to piece together a life that had fallen apart because of her own choices. Larry and Josh, Kayla's former colleagues, fared no better. After losing their jobs due to the workplace scandal, they both faced the collapse of their marriages. Larry's wife, already suspicious of his long hours and frequent excuses, didn't hesitate to file for divorce once the truth came out. She took their 2 children and moved in with her parents, cutting Larry out of their lives entirely. With no steady income and mounting legal fees, Larry struggled to stay afloat, a shadow of the confident IT manager he once was. Josh's situation was equally grim. His wife had initially tried to work things out, but the humiliation of his public affair proved too much. She left him, taking their 3 kids with her. The divorce left him with little more than the clothes on his back, and without a job or family to fall back on, Josh's life spiraled into a cycle of regret and isolation. While their lives crumbled, I focused on moving forward. The past had taught me hard lessons about trust, boundaries, and the importance of standing up for myself. With Kayla's unwavering efforts to rebuild our relationship, we found a new rhythm, one built on transparency, mutual effort, and the understanding that the past would always be a part of our story but wouldn't define our future. I set new terms for my life, both personally and professionally. I streamlined my work, ensuring I had more time to spend with Kayla and our twins. I remained a present and loving father, pouring myself into my children's lives to ensure they grew up with the stability and care I had once feared they might lose. Kayla, for her part, stuck to every promise she had made. She focused entirely on our family, never once straying from the rules we had established. She became a doting mother and a supportive wife, working tirelessly to prove that she had learned from her mistakes. Over time, her actions began to heal the wounds left by her betrayal, and while I could never forget what had happened, I learned to forgive. In the end, the choices we make always have consequences, and those consequences can define us if we let them. Mary, Larry, and Josh had destroyed their lives with their selfishness and deceit, and they were left to live with the fallout. Kayla, however, chose to confront her mistakes head-on, working to rebuild what she had broken. And I chose to accept her efforts, not out of weakness, but out of hope that we could create something stronger together. Life isn't perfect, but it's real. And for the first time in years, I feel like it's on my terms.